The moment I knew everything was about to collapse, I was on my knees inside the community maintenance shed, tightening a valve on the main irrigation line that had started to hum a high load. The hum meant pressure buildup. The pressure meant leaks, and leaks meant automatic county fines for wasting water in our drought-prone Texas suburb. My entire body was half covered in dirt and grass clippings, one knee bruised from the concrete floor. I heard their footsteps before I saw them. Linda's heavy shuffle followed by the light, smug rhythm of her son's polished loafers. Brandon's voice rang out, too loud for a place like this. "So, this is the dungeon," he said, laughing. "Kind of dark and medieval. You ever think of turning this into cloud?" "Cloud." He said it like it was a cleaning product. I didn't respond. Just finished my torque check and slid out, standing up slowly. My shirt was damp. My eyes locked with his for half a second. He looked away first. If you're enjoying stories like this one, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give the video a like. It really helps the team bring you more of these quiet war stories. Only 3% of listeners subscribe, and everyone makes a real difference. The neighborhood was humming, stable, pristine. We had just passed our quarterly HOA compliance audit with a 99.87% harmony score. Every sprinkler head was clean, every drainage line tested. 14 years of my life had been poured into this place. And not just as a volunteer, I bled into these lawns. Late nights when the main pump failed during the 2011 flood, and I rigged it back with parts from my own pickup. Weekends when no one answered the emergency HOA line except me. Every time someone forgot how fragile a community really was, I was the quiet reset button. Linda used to understand that. Back in the early years, she'd stop by my workbench with her own coffee, not some Starbucks nonsense. She brought burnt diner sludge in a thermos and sat with me asking about flow rates and vendor contracts like she genuinely wanted to learn. We'd built Southridge HOA together, not with fancy newsletters, but with caution. We lost our first block in 2011. Flash flood. I was the one who crawled through mud to pull the drainage backups. She called me her floodproof volunteer for years after that. But lately, all I heard was Brandon. Brandon who pronounced bylaw like it was a sorority. Brandon who mocked my color-coded binder system as extra. Brandon who once unplugged the pool pump mid-sink because he thought the blinking light meant it was broken. I documented it. Of course, quietly. Always quietly. The writing was on the wall long before they admitted it. Linda started sitting in on fewer maintenance reviews. My repair requests got delayed. The infrastructure budget shrank while branding and neighborhood social ballooned. Then came the tour, a full dog and pony show for potential new residents. I wasn't invited, but I watched the community camera footage after hours. Watched Linda lead them through. Watch Brandon talk like he'd personally built the irrigation backbone I'd architected during a 3-day no-sleep stint in 2018. He called the maintenance shed my future playground. I wrote that phrase down, dated it, filed it. Still, I stayed silent because some systems only crash when you hit the wrong key at the wrong time. And I wasn't ready yet. Not until Linda approached me outside the main pump station on a Tuesday morning. "Got a minute?" She said, casual, like she was asking about the weather, not legacy. The overhead fluorescence flickered slightly, an issue with the ballast I hadn't gotten around to yet. She looked up, frowning, then back at me. "We're shifting things around," she started. Brandon stepping up. "Time for the next generation." I blinked once, didn't speak, just waited. She filled the silence with the words that would come to define everything that followed. "You'll move into compliance reporting. A lighter load, less pressure. Let Brandon take on the architecture stuff. You've done your part." I almost laughed, but I didn't. I just nodded and said, "Sure." Then I walked back to my workbench, opened a master binder, and started a full export of every vendor contract, every bylaw nuance, every escalation protocol I'd ever written. If they wanted me boxed up, I'd come with a receipt. She said it like she was offering me a slice of cake. Time to hand things off. Just like that. Like the 14 years I'd spent turning Southridge's common areas from a glorified patch of dirt into a zero-violation fortress was just a warm-up act. "Brandon stepping up," she added, the words sliding out of her mouth like a sales pitch she didn't believe. You'll move into compliance reporting. Lighter load, paperwork. I was holding a flow rate report in one hand, half turned toward the cold aisle. I didn't even blink. You're benching me, I said, not asking, just stating. Linda gave that awkward chuckle older women do when they know they're gutting you, but want to pretend they're doing you a favor. Come on, it's just the natural next phase. You've done your part. Brandon's got the vision now. You've got the experience to help him succeed. Vision. The boy couldn't even tell the difference between a covenant and a coffee order. He once called a pressure regulator a fancy garden hose. I'd watched him break a valve, trying to yank it open without disengaging the safety tabs. He left his guest credentials stuck to the pump cabinet on a neon sticky note. I kept my voice level. And Brandon understands a control architecture. Linda waved a dismissive hand, already turning away. He's a fast learner. Besides, you'll train him. That's when it clicked. This wasn't a transition. It was a muzzle. Strip away my access, shift me to paperwork, and by the time Brandon flooded the entire neighborhood, they'd say I was the one who trained him. That I signed off. That I stayed. But I wasn't staying. That night, I sat at home with a glass of bourbon and a laptop full of my own notes, metadata, dependencies, escalation protocols, root contracts, not the sanitized binders I'd handed to new volunteers over the years. The real guts, the kind of knowledge that only lives in the margins of old volunteers' minds. I opened a blank memo titled Departure Protocol. It wasn't dramatic. No threats, no emotion, just line after line of exact instructions on what to notify, who to contact, where the silent tripwires were, every vendor ID, every contract reservation, every redundant line I'd built with my own two hands. And I labeled the file with the date, just in case someone ever questioned who knew what when. I thought back to the first week after the 2011 flood, when I'd worked 72 hours straight to stabilize the drains. When Linda brought me a tuna sandwich at 3 a.m. and said, "This place runs because of you." Now, I was being replaced by a kid who once asked me if HOA was like Home Office Association. At 2:17 a.m., I zipped the file, encrypted it, and dropped it into a mirror drive I knew Brandon would never find. I also made a printed copy, not because I needed it, but because the feel of paper in your hands reminds you that some things still exist outside of cloud pitches and neighborhood buzzwords. I wasn't angry, I was clear, and clarity is colder than rage. When I returned to the shed the next morning, I smiled at Brandon's empty desk. It still had plastic wrap on the monitor. He'd be arriving any day now, full of theories and PowerPoints. He'd be expecting a mentor. Instead, he'd find a locked terminal, a clean audit trail, and a woman who no longer answered to anyone on that board. I'd already decided I would train no one. I would sign nothing. I would burn no bridges, but I'd leave enough silence behind that they'd hear it echo for years. Brandon waltzed in like he was arriving for a podcast interview, not stepping into the command center of a regional HOA worth more than the land it sat on. Starbucks in one hand, phone in the other. Shoes too clean for anyone who's ever had to trace a bad drainage line. "You ready to show me the ropes?" he said with a grin like we were equals, or worse, like he thought he was my upgrade. I didn't answer right away. I was unplugging my terminal, keyboard, monitor, encrypted drives, the backup key fob I kept hidden behind the pump rack. Everything precise, everything final. I'd already wiped my credentials, rotated passwords, and revoked back-end access by the time he crossed the room. Not maliciously, cleanly, legally documented. "No," I said, standing up and pushing my chair in. "I'm done here." He paused mid-sip, confused. "You're what?" I reached into my satchel and pulled out the manila folder, heavy, intentional, printed in triplicate because I don't trust digital handoffs when the people on the receiving end can't spell bylaw. I laid it gently on his desk like I was setting down an urn. "That's the full systems inventory, off-boarding instructions, contacts for each vendor, logs, expiry dates, redundancies. Anything you don't understand in there, you probably shouldn't touch." He blinked at it like it was radioactive. "Wait, what even is this?" Behind him, Linda's voice echoed as she stepped in. "What's going on?" She saw the powered-down terminal, the neatly packed box, the empty chair. "Wait, hold on," she said, stepping forward. "This isn't how we do things." We had a plan. I turned to face her. That same woman who once told me I was the backbone of this community, who once asked me to rebuild the drainage system from ashes with no budget and less sleep, and who now handed the keys to a kid who hadn't spent one weekend fighting a single clogged line in a storm. I looked her straight in the eye. "You made your choice." She opened her mouth like she wanted to object, maybe to bargain, maybe just to explain. But the words didn't come because there wasn't a single technical thing she could say to keep me there, and both of us knew it. I walked past them without a word. Past the pump racks I'd once rebuilt valve by valve. Past the cold aisle where I'd patched lines during a lightning strike. Past the cabinet where I'd hidden candy for the interns who never lasted long. At the gate, I paused for one last glance, not out of sentiment, but clarity. I wanted to remember the exact moment they realized what they'd done. Brandon was flipping through the folder, eyebrows furrowed, lips moving silently as he tried to decode the difference between a covenant and a variance. Linda just stood there, stunned, watching the ghost of everything she just lost walk out with perfect posture. They didn't yell. They didn't ask me to stay. They didn't know how. In the lobby, I handed in my volunteer key card to Marcy at the front desk. She looked confused. "Is this a system upgrade thing?" I smiled. "Something like that." I stepped out into the Texas sun, heat rising off the pavement like a fever breaking. My phone buzzed once. An email confirming the off-boarding ticket I'd scheduled had auto-closed successfully. All credentials void. Clean handoff. End of file. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just walked away with 14 years of knowledge they could no longer afford to pretend was replaceable. The first call came at 11:42 a.m., a number I recognized as Southridge HOA Legal. I watched it ring out as I stirred cream into my coffee at a quiet corner diner 2 exits down from the entrance. I didn't decline the call. I let it ring. I wanted a timestamp, a record. Their panic had begun. By noon, they tried twice more. Voicemail from some associate junior counsel, breathless. "We'd just like to clarify some language in your volunteer agreement regarding post-termination." Clarify. That was their first misstep. Clause 7.4b didn't require clarification. It required a calculator and a chair with armrests because the number it triggered wasn't small. Back in 2011, after I personally recovered the post-flood drainage clusters and rebuilt the core spine on a weekend of fumes and sheer will, Linda sat across from me in a temporary trailer we called HQ and said, "You've earned permanence here." We redrafted my volunteer agreement. Quietly. No HR, just legal and a private signer. Clause 7.4b wasn't showy. One line, one condition, one outcome. It read, "Voluntary termination following reclassification without technical equivalent assignment activates the liability dissolution trigger with full acceleration of deferred community credits." That sentence sat on page 17 of a contract no one had bothered to audit in over a decade, until now. At the time, the value of that clause was mostly symbolic, a token, a nod. But over 14 years, with equity grants rolling in and deferred credit stacking, it had matured into something far heavier. $6.1 million spread across accelerated community fund dissolution, milestone bonuses, and a contractual clause that made performance-based severance due within 30 days of execution. Not negotiable, not discretionary, just active. At 10:06 p.m., Brandon sent out a community-wide group chat post that tried very hard to sound relaxed. Excited to take the reins and keep things moving, grateful for everything our legacy team has built. Legacy, a word people like him use when they don't know how systems work, only that they cost money. I heard from someone in landscaping ops, off the record, that Brandon also asked if they could pause the clause, as if legal contracts worked like Netflix subscriptions. By 3:15, a message from Linda herself landed in my inbox. Subject line, "Can we discuss your exit terms?" I didn't open it. Instead, I opened the Dropbox archive where I'd stored every document, every amendment, every revision, and forwarded a copy of the signed 2011 recontract to my lawyer along with a short note. Clause 7.4b is in play. Please prepare formal demand for execution. She replied 6 minutes later, already drafting. Their counsel is rattled. No surprise there. Clause 7.4b wasn't buried in legal jargon. It was painfully clear. It didn't require termination to be unfair, only mismatched. And moving me from systems architecture to compliance reporting wasn't equivalent. It was a demotion wrapped in HOA spin. At 4:40 p.m., I got a text from someone in finance. Just 2 words, they're stunned. Because the moment they tallied the line items, stock equivalents, bonuses, legal fees, audit provisions, they realized something devastating. Replacing me wasn't just arrogant, it was expensive. Linda apparently called it a misunderstanding. Brandon called it ridiculous. But the in-house counsel, she just called it binding. And finance, they went silent. Funny thing about silence, it sounds an awful lot like respect when it finally shows up too late. They thought it was just about the money. A $6.1 million mistake they could maybe soften, renegotiate, delay. Brandon fired off a series of frantic group chat messages to the board with subject lines like urgent, Clause 7.4b, alternatives, possible equivalency reclassification. 3 question marks, always a good sign from someone in over his head. The board tried to help him. Bless their hearts. But Clause 7.4b didn't care about titles or tempers. It didn't care that he was the president's son. It was a machine-written promise, legally binding, executed the moment I walked out the gate without an equivalent technical role defined and agreed upon. No committee override, no vesting delays, no post-exit modifications. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem started 24 hours later when vendor management opened my offboarding memo and saw 3 words they hadn't seen before, key personnel trigger. Because back in 2016, when Southridge was growing fast and sloppy, I'd worked with legal to lock in our service level agreements with 3 major vendors. It was a move to stabilize operations after a previous board nearly tanked our compliance uptime with a budget freeze. Those SLAs weren't just standard boilerplate. They had riders that said certain personnel, me specifically, had to remain active and named in operations reviews, or the contract would default to a 90-day renegotiation window. No me, no guarantee. No me, no trust. No me, no service. I warned Linda when we drafted them. If you want me to be invisible, don't make me irreplaceable. She laughed. Signed the papers anyway. Now Brandon was stuck. Vendor number 1, Regional Landscaping of West Texas, multi-million contract, sent a notice. Please confirm that MS. Merit will continue to oversee infrastructure compliance. If not, we are invoking SLA Clause 4.2 for reassessment. Vendor number 2, Pool Pros Unlimited, bigger fish. They didn't even blink, just wrote, if she's gone, our SLA is void. No debate. Vendor number 3 didn't write. They called, not to the HOA, but to the county code office where I'd already accepted a new advisory position. We'll get to that later. Brandon, desperate, forwarded the email from Pool Pros to legal. Subject, can we fix this? Legal's reply was short, brutal, honest, not without her. Inside Southridge, the scramble started. Finance tried to model delay strategies, holding my payout until Q4, calling it reclassification review. Legal shut that down in minutes. The clause was airtight, auditable, time-stamped. I'd even included the contract hash in my exit memo. They ran the checksum. It matched. Procurement tried to reroute vendor dependencies. Half of them came back and signed. My sign-off was still required for endpoint compliance. And the board? The board tried to draft a counteroffer, a strategic advisor role, Brandon's idea, a way to bring me back quietly under a different title without admitting failure. They even promised I could work from home and avoid aesthetic disruption. They didn't understand. I didn't walk away for peace and quiet. I walked away because they thought I'd train the man who took my place. Now, they were teaching themselves what happens when the person you discarded turns out to be the only person who knew where the fuse box was. And the fire was just starting. The demand letter went out at 8:03 a.m. Sharp. My lawyer, Michelle, corporate litigation with a talent for precision, attached the clause text, the contract, the schedule of deferred credits, and a summary of accrued penalties if payment wasn't received within 10 business days. The language was cold, exact, unmistakable. At the bottom, one final line. Failure to comply within stated period will escalate to binding arbitration with a minimum enforcement penalty of 3 times the outlined amount per clause 7.4b6. It wasn't a threat. It was a countdown. Day 1, silence. Day 2, 10:12 a.m. One of Southridge's long-term landscaping clients, Keystone West, paused their pending system renewal. No reason given, just a subject line, awaiting confirmation of technical continuity. That was a phrase I'd written myself years earlier into their procurement template, and now it was turning back on them like a tripwire they'd forgotten existed. Day 3, just afternoon, I got a message from Daniel Huang, our contracted pool consultant. Well, their consultant now. He was copied on my exit memo and was sharp enough to read between the lines. Brandon asked me to review your old config notes, he said in a text. I declined. Conflicts of interest. Also, I'm out. Not my kind of chaos. That same afternoon, a VP from Ops tried to schedule a friendly coffee via the neighborhood app. I didn't respond. Michelle advised me not to. Let the clock tick. Let the pressure rise. Let the silence stretch. Day 4, 8:17 p.m. Brandon showed up at my apartment. He stood there at the security call box, holding his phone like it would grant him authority. I watched through the corner of my blinds as he leaned in, pressed the buzzer twice, and waited. My phone lit up. Unknown caller, Houston, Texas. I didn't answer. He buzzed again, then again. The last time he did, he said something to the intercom like I couldn't quite make out, but his voice cracked. I didn't move. He stood there for 5 minutes, then left. I watched him walk to his car. Same smug posture as always, but slower now, less sure of the ground beneath his feet. Day 5. Linda. The call came in at 6:41 p.m. Blocked number. The voicemail was 37 seconds long. I listened once, then again, then saved it to my legal archive. Her voice was strained. Less of the old Southern charm, more of the clipped, careful cadence of a woman trying to convince herself this wasn't collapsing around her. I just want to talk. We didn't mean for things to go this way. We thought you were just tired. We thought maybe the shift would be good for you. I didn't realize. Look, we're trying to make things right. If there's something reasonable we can agree on, let's talk. Okay. Click. There was no apology, no ownership, just rationalization. The kind people use when they've miscalculated badly and are still hoping they can buy their way out without admitting they ever needed you. Michelle's next letter didn't mention the voicemail, but it didn't need to. It simply reiterated the deadline. 5 p.m., 10 business days from receipt. No flexibility, no grace period, just a clause. Each day that passed, the pressure built internally at Southridge, externally from vendors, quietly from within the very systems I'd helped engineer to be robust, but only as robust as the person holding the keys. And that wasn't Brandon. Not anymore. Not ever. The new advisory office smelled like fresh paint and smart decisions. Not a ping-pong table in sight. Just volunteers who still carried clipboards and whiteboards filled with schematics, not branding slogans. The day I walked in, they handed me a badge that read Sarah Merritt, Director of Infrastructure Strategy. No pomp, no onboarding circus, just a handshake, a login, and the keys to systems they wanted me to design from the ground up. Smaller community, leaner, sharper, no legacy weight dragging innovation down, and more importantly, leadership that asked questions before making assumptions. On my second day, the chair walked past my workstation and casually asked, "Is there a naming scheme you prefer for the new drainage nodes? Want your initials in the route?" I nearly laughed, not because I needed vanity, but because someone finally understood what it meant to be deliberate. In Houston, meanwhile, Southridge was unraveling one polite crisis at a time. On day 6, Linda sent a note through a personal email, the kind you use when you don't want legal to know you're reaching out. It was short and full of that old false humility. "Hope you're well. We're hoping you'll consider a short-term consulting contract, just a few weeks, to stabilize infrastructure while we onboard new leadership. Stabilize? As if I'd been the unstable one. I didn't reply. Michelle did. 2 lines. Clinical. Bulletproof. All future communication through counsel. Compensation terms outlined remain unchanged. Translation. The price of pretending I was disposable is the cost of realizing I wasn't. They'd done the math by then. Deferred credits, accelerated severance, vendor penalties, arbitration risk. Michelle had added a clause to the last letter reminding them of the SLA liabilities still unfolding in parallel. By the end of that quarter, Southridge issued an internal memo, temporary freeze on executive bonus disbursements pending strategic payout obligations. A polite way of saying we had to get the top floor's perks to cover what we owed the woman we shoved out the gate. I heard through the grapevine that Brandon started working from home more. Fewer office appearances, rumors he was exploring other ventures. One night, I got a message from Marcy, the front desk admin back at Southridge. Just a thumbs-up emoji and a screenshot of the badge log system. The message said, "Still says your old credentials ping the system once a day. Guess they never fully cleared you." I smiled. I'd already revoked my access, but the echo remained, residual code in their system that still thought I belonged, like a muscle memory that hadn't caught up to the trauma. At the new office, my team asked if I wanted to present the new system's overview to leadership. I said sure. Kept it simple, just the diagrams, the strategy, the failovers, the recovery plans. No drama, no need to prove anything. I didn't have to raise my voice to reclaim control. All I had to do was leave the wrong room and build a better one. 3 weeks after I started, I got a message from an old contact at Keystone West. The same landscaping partner Southridge once begged me to stabilize after a botched firmware rollout. The subject line read, "Thought you'd enjoy this." Inside was a screenshot of an internal Southridge service ticket. Red font flagged priority. Former director's root-level credentials still active. Urgent revocation needed. Beneath that, a timestamp and the final line, system lockout complete. Network stable. I stared at it for a long second and smiled. They'd finally realized I hadn't just worked their infrastructure. I was their infrastructure. The systems were mine in muscle memory, in command line syntax, in invisible redundancies only I ever checked on Sundays while everyone else was at brunch. And now they were frantically tracing breadcrumbs they never understood were there. What that ticket didn't say, but I knew was this: those credentials have been ghosted, rerouted, layered beneath access tiers Brandon never asked about. Not because I was malicious, because I built with caution, because I planned for failure, because root level doesn't mean access. It means understanding. And Brandon had neither. Linda must have finally caved and brought in an outside firm to clean up what they assumed would be a simple sweep. "Remove her access," she probably said, thinking it was as easy as checking a box. What they found instead was a layered labyrinth of permissions, automation scripts, legacy keys, escalation lockouts, and time-based overrides, some of which had been buried under 6 years of audit logs and still triggered fail-safes if removed incorrectly. They didn't tell me that, of course, but I didn't need them to. I saw it in the ticket language, in the delay, in the sheer panic of the phrase urgent revocation. And still they missed a few. That same week, my new community signed 2 of Southridge's mid-tier vendors. No cold calls, no road shows, no 20-slide pitch decks, just quiet referrals. A VP from one vendor told us over coffee, "Your new director of infrastructure. She built the systems that made Southridge reliable before they decided branding was more important than continuity." He didn't say Brandon's name. He didn't have to. Word travels fast in HOA circles, not the headlines. Those are for annual meetings and fluff pieces on vision. The real word spreads over vendor dinners, board meetups, and Friday afternoon group chats where someone says, "Hey, do you know someone solid for infrastructure?" And someone else replies, "Yeah, she's at the new development now." I didn't gloat. I didn't post a neighborhood app announcement. I didn't clap back or drop passive-aggressive comments. But that week during our Friday stand-up, the chair paused before closing the call and said, "By the way, great work securing those new accounts. We've never onboarded that fast before." I nodded. Just one line. Good infrastructure makes everything easier. They all agreed. Back in Houston, I imagine Brandon was still fighting for control of systems he never earned, try to rewrite configurations he barely understood, putting out fires that lit themselves the moment I stepped out the gate. But I didn't watch. I didn't need to. I had nothing left in those pumps but ghosts. And they were loyal to me. It ended the way these things always do. Not with a press release or a grand apology, but with paperwork. Unremarkable, bureaucratic, permanent. The county records posted a quiet update. Equity severance disbursement. Case closed. No headlines, no drama. Just one more line in the public filings, time-stamped and certified, showing that Southridge HOA had paid exactly what they owed me, down to the decimal, every dollar of deferred credits, every accelerated fund unit, every inch of the path they thought they could shortcut. I didn't celebrate. I just screenshotted it and filed it into a folder called Completed Systems. Southridge's website had been scrubbed clean by then. No trace of me, of course. Brandon now held the title Acting Director of Operations, though the word acting did a lot of heavy lifting. Right beneath his name in light gray font was a footnote, supported by external consultants during transition. Translation: we don't trust him to run this alone. Someone forwarded me a screenshot of a recent vendor portal update. Apparently, 3 of the legacy partners I managed were still requesting contract reviews pending architectural continuity, meaning they didn't believe he could keep things standing. They weren't wrong. Meanwhile, in my new community, my name was on one thing only, my door plaque. No polish, just Sarah Merritt, systems architect. No title inflation, no job fluff, just the facts. I never posted a farewell thread, never uploaded a lessons learned selfie from my old shed. I didn't need to. There's a kind of satisfaction that doesn't broadcast. It settles in your bones like balance returning after a storm. In the months that followed, I built out our new drainage NOC in Dallas, oversaw 2 migrations, spec'd a backup system that got adopted by 3 regional partners without a single edit. No chaos, no drama, just clean transitions, tested protocols, and a team that understood the difference between visibility and vision. Sometimes on late nights, when the hum of the pumps blends with the HVAC like a heartbeat, I think about those 14 years at Southridge, the battles no one saw, the wins that came with no applause, the architecture I left behind. And every time I drive through Houston, I glance at the blinking lights atop the Southridge Tower and smile, because I know the core of those systems is still mine. Valves I laid, configurations I wrote, failovers I designed. And I know something Brandon never will. It doesn't matter whose name is on the website. The fiber doesn't lie. And every time it pulses, every time a signal jumps from node to node across the network I once built from flood and silence, it carries one truth with it. Quiet, enduring, unmistakable. She built this. And the Karen who thought she could erase me? Well, last I heard, the board quietly asked her to step down after the annual meeting turned into a resident revolt over the sudden 40% dues hike. Brandon's vision had turned the community pool into a green slime pit and the lawns into a patchwork of dead spots. Residents started waving printed copies of my old compliance reports at every meeting, asking why the new guy couldn't match the 99.87% harmony score I'd held for 14 straight years. Linda tried one last Hail Mary, showing up at my new gate with a basket of peace-offering muffins and that same fake smile. I watched her on the security cam, pressed the intercom, and said the only 2 words she needed to hear, Clause 7.4b. The basket dropped. She never came back. That's the beautiful thing about real communities. They don't run on pastel pantsuits or smug suns with cloud dreams. They run on the quiet people who actually know where the valves are. And when you try to throw those people away, the whole neighborhood feels the leak. So if you're sitting in your own HOA right now, staring at some ridiculous fine for the wrong shade of mulch or wondering why the board suddenly can't keep the lights on, remember this. Somewhere out there is a folder just like mine. Somewhere out there is a clause just like 7.4b. And somewhere out there is a Karen who still thinks she's untouchable, right up until the day the numbers come due. Me? I'm just the woman who walked away smiling, knowing the systems I left behind would keep whispering my name long after theirs faded. Because in the end, the grass doesn't lie either. And every perfectly trimmed blade in Southridge still grows exactly the way I taught it to.